You hear that? And then also, so does anyone, okay, here we go. And now closed caption is also in effect. I'm going to switch back to sharing screen. Thank you for your patience with the fun tech things. All right. All right, so as I noted, closed caption is also available. And if you miss anything or you want to share with your compadres and network, there will be a recap that will be going up on our platform so that you can check it out. It'll have resources like articles and things like that, like research. It will also have this slide presentation also available so that you can go through and have those conversations in-house. And also start generating actionable steps based on the notes taken from what the panelists have shared with us. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right ahead. As you know, recording is in process. If you get to the Q&A point and you don't feel comfortable putting your screen on, you can submit your question or stay off screen. Or if you feel like you don't want anyone to know that it was you that asked the question, anonymous asking is also available. So let's get to the meat and potatoes. Who's here? So my name is Mars Maxwell. I am the coordinator of the community investment team. I oversee the community action grant portfolio and this wonderful event called the Community Learning Series. And then I have some amazing panelists. The panelists have switched today, so I would love for them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves. We've had two folks switched out, so I'm just gonna leave that to you guys to explain. So I'm gonna start with Carmen. Carmen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Carmen Law and I use she, her pronouns. I'd also like to do a quick land acknowledgement as well. So I am coming from the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, traditional territories, and which is also known as Kingston. So I am the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Thru Sport, which is a non-for-profit organization to empower women and girls. So in leadership opportunities and positions, we use sport as a vehicle to drive leadership. So I am also a first-generation Chinese immigrant. My parents immigrated here before I was born, and I was born here in Canada. And sport has always been a big part of my life, and so representation has always been important. I wanted to share a bit of a story in terms of my background and how I got to where I am today. So growing up in a very traditional, Chinese family, and gender norms are very normalized, and so girls, not often playing sports. However, growing up, I've always wanted to play sports, and more particularly hockey. And hockey was the one that I've always asked my parents, hey, can I play? Can I play? Can I play? Being that 6-year-old, my dream was to be the first Canadian Chinese girl to play on the Olympic hockey team. That was the dream. But that was not something that was feasible. I was told that hockey was always a boy sport, so girls don't play hockey. So didn't really get that. Luckily, I fell into playing basketball and seeing more girls and Asian girls playing basketball. I was very involved actually when I got into high school with a Chinese basketball team, which was amazing. And they're like my sisters to this day. So they're really, really wonderful. They're my community. And so it's really, and not knowing that this community existed was something that growing up, if I had known even sooner, I probably would have joined sooner. So just that was something that was big for me, is having role models and leaders and people who I really looked up to, which is really important. And so that's why today I come in with a very intersectional lens of being a woman, being Asian, and then also my queer identity comes into this as well. And so that is a perspective that I think is important. So today I hope to bring in a few different lenses and share some of my experiences with you all. And I can't wait to hear from the other presenters as well. So thank you, Mars, for inviting me.
Thank you. It's absolutely my pleasure. I'm so excited. I can't wait. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. Let us go on. So we have a youth voice on the panel. Let's make a warm welcome for Kevin for joining us this morning. Kevin, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what do you think?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Vo. I work at MLSE Launchpad, and I'm a part of the leadership and training program. I'm in grade 11, so I'm like 16 now, and my favorite sport is basketball. I'm Vietnamese, but I wasn't born in Vietnam. My parents were born in Vietnam. They immigrated here. I'm not sure when, but it was before I was born. So yeah, so that's a little bit about myself.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you. Looking forward to this. So next up is Clement. I see you. Want to go?
Yeah, thank you very much. So excited to share this panel with both Carmen and Kevin. Kevin, already very impressed at 16 years old that you're willing to jump in front of a bunch of people on a Zoom call. I know that at the same age, there's no way I would have done this. So kudos to you, and I'm happy to get to know you a little bit more. Carmen, I'm very familiar with because you know, I've been involved in Chinese basketball since 1995, and I track all the good players, and Carmen has always been sort of a legend in Markham. So really happy to see what she's done in terms of growing her organization. And you missed a boat a bit on hockey, because I believe the captain of the national team for the US is Chinese, Julie. So she's coaching out East in Canada now. But someone that is super important to the community. And I think missed that one, but we're happy that you're leading your respective organization and making kind of the impact in your respective way. So for myself, quick introduction is that I did start the Canadian Chinese Youth Athletic Association in 1995 with the objective of providing opportunities for Chinese kids to play sports. And wow, what an adventure that's taken me on. Like I've literally had an opportunity to work for the Toronto Raptors in its early days in 1997. I've been a radio broadcaster for Raptors Radio. I have worked for Slam Magazine in New York. I've worked multiple All-Star games. You know, I then started my own business. I've worked with NBA Global. I've traveled all around the world. And most recently, some of the work I'm doing now is around representation, and I work very closely with the Marvel Avenger actor, Simu Liu. So we work very closely to run a lot of community projects, and the most recent one we ran was last weekend called the Celebrity Classic, where we brought in some of his friends like Jeremy Lin and also Ronnie Chang and Hassan Minhaj to come to Toronto to raise money for Jeremy Lin's charity. And we just recently, 3 weeks ago, launched the Jeremy Lin Basketball School, which I noticed MLSE stole the image from our website to put on the flyer. So, hey, you know what? I applaud you for your creativity. And I think that the resourcefulness is kind of what we need in the community, especially if we're in line with the theme that we're discussing today. I think resourcefulness and creativity is absolutely required in the face of us trying to find opportunities, because one of the challenges I think all of us face as sort of broader community is getting the necessary support we can to build what we can. And I think all of us have probably had unique challenges. And I think I'm happy to have that discussion today about what I found useful in terms of in the broader community, where to identify sort of barriers and sort of looking at ways to creatively overcome.
Thank you so much, Clement. And I think you hit the nail on the head. That is really the foundation of Community Learning Series, is that we are resourceful, we are experts in our own lanes, and sharing that information helps all of us grow. It doesn't benefit anyone to knowledge gatekeep or resource gatekeep. We really make each other stronger when we work together. And I just really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to the folks today. And I love the camaraderie that's happening. And Kevin, I really can't wait to see where you go in life. I'm so excited for you, sir. Next up, last but absolutely not least on our panel is Curtis Lue. Curtis, please tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Hey Mars, thanks for the intro. Really excited to be joining this discussion as well, as we touch on issues of representation and inclusion and for Asian identifying folks in the sport. Like Mars said, my name is Curtis Lue. I work with the MLSE Foundation alongside Mars, supporting our community investment portfolio, supporting youth sport and sport for development opportunities with youth in Ontario and Toronto. Really using the power of sport to help youth achieve the dreams and goals they want to achieve. Like the panel here, I've had my very unique experience with sport and physical activity in very different ways. I was a kid, I wasn't necessarily super involved with any sort of organized sport. My parents didn't have the money to put me in it. And as immigrants themselves from China and then to Trinidad and Tobago and then to Canada, they didn't have the resources and faced very similar assimilation representation issues that prevented me and my brothers from being involved in sport. It wasn't until about university and later in high school that I figured the power of I found the effect of physical activity in sport on my life. And throughout my life I've been peripherally involved with things like university sports, student life, and a lot of health promotion activity. Without those opportunities, I wouldn't be in a position that I'm proud to be in today. So yeah, really looking forward to having this very intersectional discussion on how we can amp up representation and what that means for the people in this call. Thanks, Mars.
Thank you. Oh man, listen, the resumes here are everything. Okay, so let's keep the ball rolling and let's have some fun. Let's break it up a little. Let's break up the monotony a little bit. So not monotony, let's add some fun to the mix is what I really want to say. So today's icebreaker is really super simple. Name the player. I know you've been staring at the screen, so the game explains itself. Who is this? If you know who it is, either yell it out or throw it in the chat. Brian, I'm gonna make you co-host so that you can moderate the chat. Will you help me out, Brian? I saw you come in and now I'm gonna put you to work.
Absolutely, put me to work.
Thank you so much, thank you, thank you. All right, does anybody know who this is? Can I hear, can I see?
Naomi Ko.
Someone say what?
Naomi Osaka.
Perfection. Brr, 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 brr. Okay, so that is correct. This is Naomi, excuse me, yes, this is correct. That is Naomi Osaka from Japan. She's a Japanese professional tennis player. She's ranked #1 by the Women's Tennis Association and is the first Asian player to hold the top ranking in singles. She's also dating Corday, which is, if you love hip hop, that's a really sweet story. She is a 4-time Grand Slam singles champion. Her 7 titles on the WTA Tour also include 2 at the premier mandatory level at the 2018 US Open and the 2019 Australian Open. Osaka won her first 2 Grand Slam single titles in back-to-back Grand Slam tournaments. She was the first woman to win successive Grand Slam singles titles since Serena Williams in 2015 and was the first to win her first 2 in successive majors since Jennifer Capriati in 2001. And if you old like me, you remember Jennifer Capriati, so that is big things in the tennis world. Okay, so let's go to the next person. Who is this guy? This one might be a little tougher unless you're deep in the soccer world. Okay, all right. So this one has stumped folks. I actually love that. I get to introduce you to Chao Boon Kun, from South Korea. This person he was a trailblazer for Asians playing in the European leagues. Sha aimed to bring knowledge and the skills from the German Bundesliga to enrich Korean soccer. He was nicknamed Shaboom, which I think is a fire nickname, for his incredible striking ability. He remains Korea's all-time leading goal scorer to this day, which is pretty dope. It's pretty awesome, actually. And then I'm from the United States, so you know I had to throw a little, stateside situation up in there. Anybody know who this is? Oh, we don't. Okay, little Jeopardy song. Okay, this is Michelle Kwan, one of the greatest figure skaters of all time. I remember as a kid watching her on NBC. I used to be excited for Winter Olympics for figure skating because they really ran figure skating figure skating ran the Olympic events in the 90s. I don't know if anybody remembers, but Michelle Kwan perfectly exemplifies the artistry, grace, and skill that goes into this underappreciated sport. This 5-time world champion and 9-time national champion is not only the most well-decorated American figure skater of all time. She was also one of the nation's most popular female athletes, period, during her career. Despite never quite securing a gold medal, she won a silver in 1998 and a bronze in 2000. And Kwan will go down in history as one of the greatest figure skaters of all time. Thank you so much for playing this game. If you got introduced to some new athletes, feel free to jump on Google and learn more about them. Hit YouTube, watch their game tapes. They're awesome. I really enjoy coming up, watching them on television and through research, learning more about them. So I implore everyone to go learn more about these guys and also the athletes, because this sport is awesome. Okay, so let's get this convo started because time is of the essence. So I'm just going to move this over so I can fully read the questions and you can fully see the questions. Okay. Asians have been here. Canadian history books say that Asians started immigrating to Canada in the 18th century. And StatCan reports that today, 17.7% of Canada's population is Asian. Sportsnet's released an interview with notable Asians in the Canadian sports market about their views on representation. The interviewees say that representation of Asians is still not on par with some other Canadians. So I'm asking the panel, what do you think? I'm going to start with Kevin. As a youth voice on this panel, can you please share how you and other young Asian folks feel about the representation of Asians in sports, sports media, and leadership in Canada? I'm throwing you right into the water. Let's start swimming, Kev. Can you hear me? Kev, you gotta unmute yourself.
Yeah, he said that he goes, the lights are flashing at LP, so can you please get back to me?
Oh no, okay. Oh, I hope everything is okay over there, guys. Okay, so can any of the other panelists just kind of jump in and talk about, I know some of you talked a bit about it in your intros. Is there anything that you would like to add that folks can take something else away from this conversation?
I could go on forever. I want Carmen to kind of take a stab at this first.
Sure. Yeah, I think that in terms of representation in sport, it's definitely increasing, which is a really positive thing. And in terms of the diversity of sport, types of athletes, which is great. I think the piece that needs to continue to progress and change is outside of the cultural celebration pieces. So for example, Asian Heritage Month or Lunar New Year or any of the very specific times when it's like, hey, sports marketers are like, this is an opportunity to highlight and do these things. What we need is a much greater emphasis outside of those times. And that is for, I think, any group, any marginalized or equity seeking group or equity deserving group. But I would say that that would be the first component, is to really have representation and visuals and speakers throughout the year and making it important.
Absolutely. Now that you've heard Karma's response, would you like to jump in, Clement?
Yeah, I'll try to be as brief as possible. I feel like this has been sort of a plus 25-year fight for me on this particular one. So on the high level, I think that as Carmen was alluding to, it's definitely evolved, improving. A lot of this has to do with the fact that if you're sort of first generation immigrant coming to Canada, your focus is not on sports, it's on survival, it's on food on the table, it's about making sure your kids survive. And so therefore, the general sort of focus then becomes academia as a way to kind of elevate you and get you out of your situation. And so therefore, a lot of the kids that are born from immigrants in Canada, their parents were very focused on academia or career, and thus sports gets put on the wayside. And as a result, if it's not prioritized, you're not going to have the foundational elements to be able to really excel at the top levels. But as we find, I've gone through a couple generations now, with this organization, and as we have parents now that are sort of in their second generation, they see the benefits of having a more holistic child, where the kid is not just about all academia. They should also have a chance to do music. They should have a chance to do sports. They should have a chance to do social, like all these other things. They realize that these other pieces are very important as part of being a well-rounded person, which ultimately helps you be a successful person. And because of that, sports does have its place, and as a result, your pool of talent then increases, and based off of that pool of talent, you are then able to pluck a few elite individuals who then serve as role models in the community. And one of the things that I will say is that, borrowing from Carmen's experience, is that, I don't know, Carmen, if you remember, but there was a player named Cecilia Chan who played in the Toronto community. She's a Chinese basketball player. Before her, there was nobody like her. And as a result, that generation that came right after her, like the Kim Lees, the Christine Wongs, and people like that, we had an overabundance of Chinese girls that played college basketball, and like over indexed, versus on the boys side, there was nobody. And we had thousands and thousands of boys playing basketball, but none of them played at the college level. And is that a skill thing? Is that an athletic thing? I think part of that is a perception thing, and to say that I saw Cecilia playing at the college level, I too can play at the college level, versus for a lot of the boys, they didn't see anyone like them at that next level. So they think that their plateau is high school. And so it's a very interesting perspective, because now you see a lot of Asian kids playing at the post-secondary pro level even, and I think that has definitely opened the doors for a lot of young people in terms of the realm of possibility. And ultimately, from a representation piece, I steal that and I say it's role modeling. If you see people there, you believe it's possible, and if you believe it's possible, then you can possibly do it.
Thank you so much. I think representation matters, and I think you both summed that up quite nicely. I'm going to jump to the next question, and I'll give an opportunity for other panelists to respond as well. We're going to mix it up a little bit. So, a study titled "The Role of Recreational Sport and the Adaptation of First-Generation Immigrants in the U.S." states that fitness is not a top priority for newcomers, which you so eloquently just stated, especially those working long hours for low wages. How do you respond to parents in Canada who are also concerned about the cost barriers to participation?
Let's give this to Brian, because
you want to give it to who? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was saying one of the other panelists who haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Curtis, obviously I'm Kevin. I'm not going to expect you to be able to answer this question offhand. Curtis, do you have any ideas offhand?
Sure. Yeah. I think what Clement had said about this kind of shift into shaping sport as a tool for holistic development of kids in Canada, I think is a good direction to take things. I think I draw back to the fact that I was never really super involved in sport for this reason, from a cost perspective. Again, like Clement said, like my parents, when they got to Canada, they were focused on surviving and quote unquote assimilating into what it meant to be in Canada. And a lot of this stuff was never on their priority. My dad played hockey, you know, to fit in, and you know, with ragtag secondhand skates, and thank goodness he did the game, because it really impacted me, because he saw the benefit of not necessarily being involved in organized sport, but being involved with some sort of physical activity, with some sort of team building activity. So I think if I were to, as not a parent, if I were to respond to parents in Canada who are concerned about cost barriers to participation, I would emphasize that opportunity for well-rounded development, that there is a focus on, this can provide success for your kids and for you and for whoever's participating beyond the court, beyond the rink, beyond whatever venue you decide to be in, and really emphasize that holistic development. Growing up Asian or Asian identifying, so much of our futures is placed on career growth and career success and academic success. But when you think about sport and how those opportunities can support the others, I think that is a huge emphasis on, a huge appeal as to how there's hidden value in sport. And obviously cost is a thing, and there are supports that are required on the monetary side, but if it provides any sort of silver lining, there is value outside of cost for involvement in sport opportunities.
Thank you, Curtis. I think that's really on point, and I love that we're able to really draw from personal experience to so as a youth and as a child who really is really interested, you wanted to understand that. Carmen, I see you. Just really quick, I want to massage the question a little bit so that Kevin can join us. Kevin, your friends, your experience at Launchpad, how do kids react when their parents are challenged by the cost barriers? And how has Launchpad helped, if that's your parents' story or your friend's parents' story, how has Launchpad helped eliminate those barriers for you? How's it made it easier for you?
So working at Launchpad, one of our core values is to break barriers. And so as Launchpad does is that its location is placed between a lot of low income areas. It also allows for girls to play sports with only girls so that they can feel more comfortable, and that all the programs are free, so that there's no cost barriers. So I would respond to parents that there is a come up of places that are trying to break these barriers. And I guess that's.
I love that. Thank you. And I like that you're able to just do that work in this direct service way and this face-to-face way. And that really makes people feel comfortable when they can relate to your story and they know that support is there. Carmen, I want to hear you had your hand raised. I'm so excited to see what you're going to say.
Yeah, so makes a lot of sense in terms of costs being a major barrier, and time being a barrier, as well as some of the other panelists have alluded to in terms of that survival. Parents need to make money for food on the table first. Some of the things that is important to, I think about as well is beyond the individual parent, and it takes a community to, and it really takes a village to support and break some of these barriers. So some of the indirect costs to sport is not just the programming. There's a lot of funding, a lot of grants and things like that. But some of the things that are very costly are travel in and out, hotels potentially, equipment. These are all kind of in addition to the, hey, we're just signing up for the program. So in terms of, this might not just be a response to the parent, but almost a response to how a community can help and how a community can contribute, is how can we reach out to our fellow teammates and say hey, I can offer this person a ride, or, hey, they need an extra meal, I've got an extra sandwich here. So those are just all these additional costs that are important to think about, in terms of especially immigrant families that might not be able to have their child in sport. And then the other piece is thinking about it from a physical literacy perspective. Are in terms of, as an example, my parents growing up didn't really have that as a perspective. It was more of participating in organized sport. And so physical literacy is, in a sense, free as well, right? So how can we have people learn how to move and contribute to the larger picture of a holistic self, to a holistic athlete? And those are really important, but it takes time to build, and education is important because we may not be as well aware of physical literacy.
Thank you. I think that physical literacy point, well, obviously the village was an amazing point, but the physical literacy one really like struck me. And I'm just like, you're absolutely right. If parents are not already on that mindset, how will they know how to have that conversation with their youth who are so excited? And having a community be able to share those resources and say, this is how you bring it back and this is how we can support you through that. I think that's a very poignant thing to say. I'm going to jump to the next question. Thank you so much. I hope everyone's having a good time because I'm loving this. Okay, in this same study, it says that some Asian parents have made recreational activities a priority based on their kids' interest in an activity. But what they want to see or know is that cultural values are part of the programming. This is open to all panelists. You can answer any way you want. Do you think it is important to maintain cultural values within your program space? If so, how does your organization reiterate and reaffirm cultural values on and off the field?
Well, I can take a stab at this.
Sure.
It's a bit complicated. My organization inherently does have an element of culture behind it, because we started off as trying to create opportunities for Chinese kids to play basketball, because in the mid-90s it was very difficult. But as I was mentioning earlier in this conversation, I don't find that is as much of a barrier, because I do find that there are a lot of Asian kids playing at a high level now. However, I think the focus has shifted a bit, where it's not, it's a little bit more around creating, I guess, pride and confidence in your cultural heritage. And so the way we've integrated that is going back to kind of my original point around identifying role models in the community and celebrating their achievements, so that young people find that there are people like that, and helping them to identify them. So I'll give a great example, is that we had this event this past weekend, as I was mentioning, with all of these different Asian celebrities from sport, music, movies, all that kind of stuff. I got a note from a parent whose children are half Indian, half Chinese, and paraphrasing, he said, "Thanks for my kids think being Asian is cool now. Thanks for letting them feel that way." So it's a bit of a paraphrase, but it's interesting, like for them to basically be in an environment where, and I'm not saying this is not cool, because I think it's cool, but if you're like the CEO or the CFO of a company, or an accountant or a scientist or an engineer, really important, really, really good stuff. But when you're a younger person, sometimes you like to you lean towards pop culture, whether it be sports or entertainment, and when you don't see yourself being portrayed in a positive light, it could get you down sometimes, and you feel like, why is it that guy is always getting kicked in the face with sand, or why is that guy always playing these silly roles? But when you see people out there that you can identify with, and they exude positivity, then that's the way I kind of view it from my organization, and that we elevate and we celebrate those that are in those types of positions, to help give all the other younger people a sense of pride behind what they're doing. And that's kind of how we've integrated cultural values. It's not so much as we're sitting around teaching them about Chinese customs, as it pertains to basketball and stuff like that. If anything, probably need to open that up a little bit more to Western kind of philosophies for the sport. But that's kind of how we've done the integration, for my organization.
Anyone else want to tackle this, or should I go on to the next one? Because I'm super happy to, because time is of the essence. So if you have something pressing, make your point. If not, I'm going to jump to the next question. Everyone good? Okay, awesome sauce. Okay. So in an interview with the CBC, Sarah Tamara, a figure skater on Canada's national team, said that being an Asian Canadian athlete allows her to embrace being a Canadian while still being tied to her Asian roots. Tamara has made it to the professional level of competition. Many young Asian people also share this aspiration. They also want to honor their cultural expectations whilst being an athlete. As a young athlete, Kevin, what advice do you give your friends looking to embrace both culture and sport?
I'd say just being yourself and embracing like your culture and is the most important part of being a young athlete, because when you embrace your culture, you're comfortable and you're having fun. And I think that's the most important of playing sports, is to have fun and be comfortable, you know, because there's a lot of sports that are team based and all that. And like, if you're not comfortable with your teammates, then you're just going to lose.
That's exactly what it is. Clement, I want to just follow up with that and say, how can non-Asian people help Asian youth honor their culture in the program space? So direct service staff, leadership, all of us who come in contact with Asian kids, how do we make sure that they feel like they can be authentically themselves in that space and they have all the support they need? And as Carmen mentioned earlier, that they do feel they are part of the village and they're being taken care of in that respect.
Yeah, because I answered the last question. I don't want to monopolize the time, but I would kind of redirect this question to Carmen. And basically my ask of her is that being sort of a high level athlete who was Asian in ethnic heritage, like how did you feel, like what did you think could have been done institutionally or structurally or something to make you feel like you were celebrated as sort of an athlete, as opposed to say someone that's sort of an outsider playing the sport? So it's similar to this question, but I think that it kind of goes hand in hand in the sense that if they celebrate you as the athlete in general, as opposed to an anomaly, then like how, like what do you, because I'm sure you got it, like as a player, you know, playing on a high level, being the anomaly, I'm sure you got those names called and you were treated in a certain way. And I'm sure you probably had some thoughts growing up in terms of how that could have been handled better.
Yeah. Thanks, Clement. I think this is actually a great question and a tough one for sure. Because similar to, I think, reflecting on my experience as an athlete, as a younger athlete, all I wanted to do was assimilate. All I wanted to do was be like the other athletes. But being a much smaller player, so I'm only 5'4", being in basketball, that's tiny. And so it was very much of looking at, okay, how can I beat the odds and how can I be similar to the rest of my teammates? So I think the piece about creating a more inclusive environment and for leaders and for structures on how that can be supportive, I think it's very much of coaches and role models being more aware of, you know, what is going on in an athlete's upbringing and their culture, in terms of family structures and even family dynamics. Many, as we know, many Asian cultures are more group and collective oriented. So what does that look like? And how do we support athletes that have a more collective or group oriented background, right? And even in terms of my coaches and, you know, saying, hey, you need to be more selfish. You need to be more selfish. You need to be more selfish sometimes. You know, as a point guard, I'm like, yep, I'm always passing. And so even some of those integrated pieces, hey, no, I'm like looking at other people first and putting them first and putting them first and, you know, putting the team first. And so it's really interesting in terms of how those thought processes are integrated into an athlete, and how your culture, cultural background plays into the athlete mindset as well. So again, going back to the role modeling components and how athletes are brought up, I think is important.
Hey, so if you're okay with me jumping in there, I think Carmen actually raised up a good point that I totally forgot about. And so I'll give MLSE some kudos. Raptors 905 actually brought me in to go speak to the team around Chinese New Year, to talk to them about Chinese New Year, because there's like, all you guys are American. You guys don't understand the cultural mosaic of Canada. Let's set up sessions formally. So the coaching staff said, we're going to introduce you guys to a different culture every month. And we're actually going to sit down and talk about it. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of guys, like when I walked into a room, it was very uncomfortable. The team had just finished a practice and they were a bit grumpy. And then one of the players actually said, before I started speaking, he literally said, yo, how much time is this going to take? Was this on the agenda? You know, like, so that did not feel comfortable at all, right? But I think that what I did was, you know, obviously I acknowledged that, you know, he had just had a rough practice and that, you know, try to de-escalate that situation. But this is where we win. This is where we win the players. We had food. We had great Chinese food, boxes of Chinese food, chicken wings and stuff like that. And that just got them in a good mood. And we had some pretty cool stuff. And then afterwards, you know, stomachs full, they're in a much better mood. We had a discussion. So kind of playing off of what Carmen said is that sometimes the leadership of these respective teams, whether it be coaches, general managers, or whatever, if they can facilitate that environment of wanting to learn about other people's cultures, whether it be learning from your own teammates or learning from external groups, if that becomes a norm, then everybody's always just naturally looking to understand, you know, the diversity in the environment. And I think that is very useful. So I just wanted to share that little tidbit because yeah, Carmen totally reminded me that Raptors 905 did facilitate that opportunity for me. And despite the resistance, I didn't take it as an offense. I was looking at it more like they're hungry and tired. But once we were able to address that, then we had a very nice conversation. And I'm glad we got to share a little bit of Toronto with them.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. Also, can I get a plate? And two, I just really appreciate you guys bringing in the psychology and the sociology behind these conversations and how important it is to kind of unpack that and understand not only Western culture, Eastern culture, or however folks like to break it down these days, but just like really understanding that as people, we do get socialized in these very particular ways, and the psychology behind that when you go to facilitate in the space, the leadership coming in and saying, hey, let's move like this, or the village supporting in this particular way because there is a group dynamic. And so it says, you don't have to change who you are. We want you to tell us more about that, or we're going to go take our own time because you're not responsible for teaching us. We're going to go take our time to go learn that. And then we're going to create a space where you can be fully authentically yourself, but the way that we're going to coach this basketball game. So if you're giving all the time, maybe we set you up for plays and then tell you specifically when we want you to take that shot so that you have a balance of self and you don't feel like you're turning against yourself to be a great player. So that's what I drew down from what you guys shared. I'm going to jump to the next one. When we consider intersectionality, neurodiversity, and the vastness of culture within the Asian youth population, who is being listened to the least? And what are some of the things that are saying that are not commonly heard that need amplification? Curtis, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Can you talk to us and maybe tell us a little bit about what this brings up for you?
Sure, thanks, Mars. Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack in that question. Obviously, like I'm, you know, as a male in the space, I'm not going to be going on about, you know, the voice that I need amplified. And, you know, there's a lot of people that are here that I know that, you know, may not have the opportunity to speak that I do. In terms of who is being listened to the least, I mean, you know, I'll defer to like the people in the room to kind of, you know, advocate or speak for themselves on, you know, what they need to say. I think for me, I think a lot of the work I do specifically at MLSE on the business side is with our Asian inclusion group. So employee inclusion group, making sure that within the sports organization, within the sports business community, a lot of the things that we're finding, at least in our vacuum of work, is that, you know, obviously women and girls in the Asian identifying space do not represent at this moment a very, very high degree of leadership. That's just you know, a glimpse at kind of where the industry needs to move. So I would say that, when we consider, the male-dominated space that we're in and the lens that, female identifying and female, participants have to bring to the space, I would say that that is a pretty obvious jumping off point. But obviously when we consider things like intersectionality and neurodiversity, yeah, I think, members of all these groups need amplification. And I think, as a mixed race individual myself who kind of struggles with, an identity that isn't, quote unquote quite Asian or quote unquote quite Caribbean, for me, I struggle finding that voice in space. So I think, all that to say, I think there's lots of tendrils here that I think can have their own identity. It's such a, when we talk about Asian, barriers facing quote unquote Asians in this community, that's, to me, that's a bit of a nebulous question, because subgroups in this space are all going to have such a unique lens on the challenges they face. So I think instead of, pointing out one or two groups here that may or may not need amplification of voice, I think it's a shift in mindset that needs to happen. And when we talk about Asians in the space, to consider, okay, that's one level of things, but from an intersectional standpoint, what else do we need to consider in the space of Asian, that need to be addressed, and who are the experts in the room that can address that, and working strategies around that really, really broad group of people to, to help, get all the voices we need to get in the room. That sounded long-winded. That's my bad if it did, but it's a lot.
No.
I just feel like there's a lot to unpack there.
No, I mean, I appreciate your candor. I think there is a lot to unpack in this question. We have a limited amount of time, and I really wanted to make sure that I hit as many avenues as possible, because the conversation is just grand, and I wanted everyone to feel like there was an entry point for them to come into the conversation. I think that throughout this conversation, we've heard a bit about some things that need to be amplified. So we don't need to drill down here. I'm actually, oh, sorry, Carmen, what you got to say, baby?
So I just wanted to add really quickly, this is definitely, Curtis, you're so right. This is such a complex question, so many layers to it. I just wanted to speak to the amplification is about not just individual groups, because something like this can be seen as slightly divisive, because you're fighting for space, you're fighting for voices. It's about amplification of each other. So if you hold, let's say, one but not another in terms of intersectionality, it's how can we lift each other up? How can we lift another group up? Step aside, in terms of very clear allyship, step aside and let's elevate. And some of the other pieces is looking at even like always leaving seats at the table that are free for different and new identities to come up. Because just as Curtis said, there's so many different pockets, and diversity, that's the value of diversity, is we all fit in different ways. And how can we create and leave space consistently at decision-making tables for different groups? And really it's using our spaces to elevate.
You know what? I really appreciate y'all checking me, because I definitely was coming from a space of like, as a queer immigrant person in Canada, my Black experience is definitely different than someone born and raised here, and as a third culture person, first generation American. And so I was really coming from this place of like, when we do this work, and whether it's funding or activism or whatever it is, we do tend to zero in on a particular group that we say like, oh, well, trans folks have not had this platform, so let's focus in on them. But I love the way that you check me, because now I get to go back and think, well, okay, am I being divisive? How am I being divisive? And how can I change? How can I improve my lens? Or how can I clean up my lens so that I'm able to look at this from a more holistic perspective? I really appreciate that. Thank you, really, really, thank you so much. I'm going to go to the next question. I can't wait to hear. Okay, so Let's talk about the impact of sport on youth mental health, particularly in the Asian community. And the mental health of South Asian youth in Peel Region, Toronto, Canada, a qualitative study of determinants, coping strategies, and service access. It says that South Asian youth face many mental health stressors from intergenerational and cultural conflict, academic pressures, relationship stress, financial stress, and family difficulties, many of the things that you guys have mentioned today. These stressors can contribute to mental health challenges such as depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. Only 36% of the mental health resources presented to the youth were identifiable. Most did not feel well informed about the mental health resources available in their neighborhood. So with all the avenues of representation, mental health is also one of those things that we want to zero in on. So how does your organization respond to the gap in awareness and services for not just South Asian youth, but all Asian youth? Is the response tailored for specific ethnicities within the Asian diaspora? And can you share how your organization factors in response to youth with physical and cognitive disabilities who are also facing mental health challenges and barriers to service? Now, we originally had Niran from South Asian Autism Awareness Center, who was going to hold down this conversation in this thing. So I left it in here because I don't think that you necessarily have to be a mental health professional in order to understand how mental health has an impact on Asian youth, and you can implement those things in your curriculum, in your logic models, and your inputs rather, when you are doing your logic model. So I was just wondering if we can just kind of just throw out some of what this brings up initially. Choose which question feels most comfortable to answer. Let us know which one you're answering, and we'll go from there. And just to give you a heads up, it's 11:59. I would like by 12:10 at the latest to switch to Q&A. So please keep your answers concise.
I'll take a stab at this first, because I think probably of the organizations, including MLSE, my organization is the most tenured. We've been around the longest. And then I think that what we can do is speak to how maybe MLSE has looked at this stuff, and then speak to Comment's group, because it actually will speak to the generational perspectives of how this type of thing is managed. So you're talking to me, old school guy, mental health. There was no mental health. You have a problem, you keep it locked down, you fight through that. That's the generation I came from. So as a result of that, I'm not going to lie, like, we probably do not have very progressive policies with regards to supporting people with mental health challenges in my organization. Obviously we're aware of it now because it's definitely been raised to the forefront of our culture. And we don't have anything formal, to be honest with you. It's more like, if I think about how I personally handle it as the leader of the organization, is that I would hear about it more through my management team, and it would filter up. And if we felt we had the tools to address it, we would. But we don't have professional services or infrastructure that would even look to address this. So it's a good call out that inclusion and accessibility, and also things like that, not just in terms of mental health, but also any sort of other whether it be physical or mental, type of challenges. It's tricky. Like I think a lot of us who do this stuff, we probably do it off the side of our desk. Like, so my day job, you can see my goofy office in the background, but basically I do network infrastructure for cellular communication network. And no, I had nothing to do with Rogers, but I'm not going to throw shade there. But basically that's my day job. For 25 plus years, this nonprofit stuff has been something I do on the side for fun. And at the end of the day, like, we're just trying to survive and keep afloat and keep the organization running. But I think there's always going to be competing priorities in your organization, whether it be growing, financial, people, whatever. But this, by raising this question, you definitely kind of brought it to the front, where and I'm not worried about being transparent about it, to say, hey, if you're asking this question and I don't have an answer for you, probably something I should look into. So I'm happy you brought it up. It's definitely something I should raise to my leadership team, and we should probably be a little bit more proactive about it. But I wanted to just share that as the oldest organization here, that there's probably a lot that are like me, that we're putting it on the back burner because we're just so preoccupied with our existing operation that we don't really think about this too much. But I wanted to at least give you my perspective even though it's probably not something you want to hear, but that's just the reality of what organizations like us might take this as.
No, your honesty is absolutely everything we need here. Like, no one needs to have the correct answer, the perfect answer. You know, like, this is a genuine conversation with folks who either have direct experience, work experience, we're working together. We are a village, we are a community. It's community learning series. And so we're going to falter. We're not going to always say or do the right thing. But what we do is we lift one another back up and say, hey, this is how we go down this road together. And I appreciate you saying, like, look, I'm from the old school. I'm old too, baby. So I know it was a walk it off situation. You know what I mean? You be fine, do your work. You know what I mean? Everybody's got problems. You're not unique in having issues. So I really get where you're like, how this shows up in policy. And this is exactly why we're having these conversations, because our biases show up in our policy. And so and they show up in how we do our work. So I really appreciate you just being straight up and just being like, bro, we don't got it like that. So thank you, because that makes our also our audience feel like a part of this conversation too, if these are things that they're thinking about implementing and haven't done yet, and are not sure how to. So I appreciate that. Carmen, have you by any chance had any experience around this? Curtis,
Curtis, you want to go first, or?
I'll just respond really quick to piggyback on Carmen about the things you said about, you know, the importance for community building and creating space for people to get familiar with the services they have at hand. And you know, I'm looking at question 2 when we talk about tailored responses for specific ethnicities within the Asian diaspora. Like Clement, like you said, you know, my parents, you know, to them mental health not a priority on their radar. It was just, again, something that you had to bury just to survive in Canada. I think in terms of an organizational response to you know, mental health for any specific cultural group, again, if it's not baked into policies, I don't think it's going to show up as effectively as it could. But when Carmen brought up the idea of like building community and, you know, the importance of relationship building, I think that, and Mars, you know this from our work, I think that kind of community building response is just one of many avenues that can help people build familiarity with the resources they have around them, the comfort to share with people what can be done to not only address mental health, but, you know, address a broad spectrum of, you know, holistic health issues. So to me, you know, so much stuff to unpack there, but I think when we talk about things like, you know, being able to build a network where people can share comfortably, I think that, I mean, at the very least, I feel like that can connect people of a certain background with services that might help for them. But anyway, my takeaway there is, you know, the importance of that sharing and that sort of relationship building. I'll pass it over to Carmen.
no, I appreciate that. And just to answer Clement and to add to what Curtis just said. So the way that MLSE Foundation answers this call is that we fund organizations that have a healthy mind pillar that are really interested in addressing those concerns. And so I think that's one of the great ways that we do that. Also, there's a lot of support systems at MLSE, excuse me, MLSE Launchpad as well. It acts as a community hub for a myriad of services. So, and there is a wellness component in the Launchpad building. So I think that the foundation does take it very seriously and has definitely put the money where their mouth is. So I think I believe that answers that. Carmen, did you have something really quick? We're at 12:06.
Yeah, just really quick. In terms of like the community building, like that is so important. I think in my day job, I'm very lucky that I've trained in a lot of the mental health pieces in terms of prevention and awareness. So we actually, our co-founder and I, like we bring that into our spaces, into our communities, and we open up for our athletes to be able to have conversations. Even if we have something on deck, we say, hey, you know what, this is a tough time right now. Let's have some conversations about some of the tough topics. For example, some of the, you know, Black Lives Matter and some of the pieces about sexual violence. Like there are things that are happening in the world that are tough. And so it's creating space, even if it's in a practice, in, opening up that space to have conversations with your athletes. In terms of, Asian communities, it's still stigma. I will say it is still a pretty large stigma in terms of mental health. In terms of some practical resources, the NCCP locker room, they do have free mental health resources and training for coaches. It's free. I think it's only an hour long and you can take those pieces. Mental health first aid is also fantastic as a resource. So I think just encouraging coaches, leaders, mentors to be engaged in their own learning, to be able to support these conversations is helpful, in addition to building trust and also, demonstrating and role modeling your own vulnerability. Those are areas that we can all do as leaders to bring in our athletes and really be able to create safe spaces.
Absolutely. Can you do me a favor? Can you repeat the locker room resource? What was it called again?
So it's part of the NCCP. If you log into the NCCP site, they have learning modules that coaches can take, and it's one of the sessions is a mental health one. They have like a concussion series. They have quite a few different series.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I think folks on this call will really appreciate that resource. All right, I'm going to jump forward. Asian women in sports have become increasingly more visible, scoring Olympic medals and dominating international tournaments. In recent years, many Asian women athletes have used their platforms to shine a light on the injustices they face behind the scenes in their personal and professional lives. Carmen, in your work with Thru Sport, can you tell us how your program helps girls push back against the transactional nature of participation and gender-based injustices? And does your approach shift when addressing youth with trans and/or queer experience? And so, what do you do differently?
Wow, that is a great question. So in terms of the transactional nature of participation in sport, so something that I'm going to talk about is in terms of from personal experience, it's transactional because it's parents look at it as, what are you going to get from this activity? What are you going to get from sport? What are you going to get from music? And how does that contribute to your future development, your career, your success? So it's a return on investment kind of mentality. And so for us, what we've been trying to look at quite a bit as an organization is, what are those transferable skills that come out of sport and how can we articulate them very specifically, especially women and girls, Asian girls as well. It's taking a look at, okay, what are you going to gain from this experience further than just dribbling a ball or dribbling or puck handling, whatever that might look like. And so for us, we are elevating our athletes to be leaders, and using those skills, we are trying to build a larger community to fight those injustices, to give them a louder voice and give them the confidence as well to fight for themselves and to fight for others, because that's what we need is, again, it's building a larger community of people who are willing to do that, and building allies as well. So that is something that I would say is a big part, is being able to articulate some of those transferable skills and being important to later in life, because that's how it got me here. Is as much as I know Clement has talked about my basketball game, most of the things that I've learned and done is off the court, but I've been so thankful for my experiences on the court.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate that you're able to put this into practice, and you make sure that your team is also on board. That's really powerful. And that has a strong impact on long-term outcomes. And it just definitely reverberates through the community. I really appreciate that, because folks, Anyway, I'm about to go into a whole lunchtime conversation. Okay, moving on. And also, I think Clement might be your number one fan. All right, so next slide. We're going to switch gears really quickly because it's 12:12 and we are running 2 minutes over schedule. So I'm a big fan of once you know, okay? So then what do you do with that knowledge, right? So the Canadian Center for Ethics in Sports says that safe sport policies are a vital first step, but true culture change is a slow process that requires buy-in from leaders and participants to be sustainable. Between their Thru Sport framework and their pilot project Evolve, CCES has been able to conclude that culture change is fundamentally personal, but that for it to succeed, sport leaders need to be self-aware of their individual and collective contributions to the culture, both negative and positive. And I think that we've been really talking a lot about that today. And I love how the questions have been really feeding one another. Some of you have really highlighted like how important this leadership component is. I think Clement talking about how setting the tone when you went to go talk to the Raptors 905. I think that's a great example of how this can happen in real time. So I think that answers the how can leadership ensure organizational buy-in. But this part I would like to understand. How does a community hold an organization accountable once they have publicly stated that they are committed to social change? So once an organization puts out social media, does press, invites people to the conversation, how do you ensure they actually make the changes and that it's just not performative?
Yeah, I'll take an initial stab at this. I think you could actually pair this back to pretty much anything that has to do with organization. Like I'm sure all of you have been in meetings where you have a lot of discussion and then everyone walks away from the room. And then a week later, you come back to the meeting and you're kind of, so who was supposed to do what, right? I think that that's a very common theme across anybody who's ever been part of any sort of a team. So I think some of the obvious things would be that much like running a meeting, you have assigned action items and timelines that basically you try and meet. And when you're transparent about, what some of those milestones are, that allows people to, I guess at least see visibly what you're attempting to do. But also equally important to that is to have the necessary feedback mechanisms, which are not defensive, but facilitative in terms of allowing people to kind of give their thoughts in terms of how your progress is doing. Because as we all know, you can take words and do many things. So for instance, like I'll give a live example. So we stated as one of the beneficiary components of the event we ran last weekend was we're using the money to go and build the CCY Community Center. So we're trying to build that thing. It's really hard. And we're being pushed back, in terms of building permits and budgets and contractor schedules and stuff like that. So it's one of those things where it's like you want to be public and you want to be transparent in what you're doing, but obviously there's like a lot of stuff that goes into doing projects like that's much like there's a lot of stuff that goes into implementing policy change, and how you position and put words out in the public. It can obviously be very subject to interpretation. So this is very complex in terms of how you create that level of accountability with the publics, because publics are like, I'm just being honest, a lot of times you don't know who these people are. And a lot of times the people might be looking to pick a fight, because unfortunately in today's world of social media, people just like to needle at things, but you'd never want that to discourage you from accepting constructive sort of constructive feedback. But I guess sort of my feedback to the young people here is that I think you should always be open to feedback, but you also need to be very mindful of where it's coming from and what the motivations are, and don't let it necessarily discourage you from trying to progress. Because I think this discussion with all the people here today has been very progressive. But you could see a world where we could spiral if we try to save the whole world and try to address every single thing that is a bit of a problem in the world. That can become very overwhelming. I think sometimes, much like when you're facing an impossible task, when you start step by step and look at things that you feel are achievable, you're making a difference. even if it's small. Like you just want to keep moving the rock forward. And I think that you know, to answer everybody's everything is not possible. But stay true to yourself, stay true to what you believe is right. And I think that definitely is a way to kind of help focus and progress your organization forward.
I mean, I think that's fantastic. Thank you. That was a really nice summary to really, I think, talk about how organizations hold themselves accountable. And I really like the point of the feedback mechanisms, being able to have that eval data from the folks who engage your services when you put out your initiatives, or when you put out the benchmarks that you want to reach to the public, and you ask them, hey, have we satisfied those goals? Were we lofty? Where can we improve? What were the pluses and deltas of the situation? And having that direct feedback, those metrics are like, whether it's numbers or testimonials or studies, research to practice, all those different components are that you mentioned that I'm just kind of parsing apart in this response. I think really illuminates how we can hold organizations accountable. Organizations just have to want to be held accountable. And I think that's like the tricky part, because there is a power dynamic there. I'm gonna jump. Don't do me. Okay, thank you. All right, so the goal of this conversation is for all of us in this virtual space to walk away with new information to chew on, information that we can plant and feed into our program spaces, not as rhetoric, but as part of our organizational integrity and work plans. I want to jump into the Q&A. You have 15 seconds. Is there anything you want to share with us that will help us do this before we take questions from the audience? No, everybody? Okay, well, let's get this Q&A popping. Brian, I will ask that you help me moderate this as I'm in this presentation screen. And I think I saw Brandon jump in. So Brandon, I'm going to find you and make you a co-host so that you can also help Brian moderate, because I'm putting the team to work. You love it. You love it. If you have a question, please come off mute and ask your question, or drop it in the chat if you would prefer not to speak. But I would love to hear feedback, commentary, what your experience was here today, what you're taking away, all of those different avenues, please, because it takes many avenues to have a holistic approach to representation, and your viewpoints are as important as our panelists today. So please feel free and comfortable to speak. And also, don't make me look crazy with quiet either. Y'all got to say something. Wow. Y'all really don't have any feedback? Is anything happening in the chat?
Yeah, so two things I want to call out. One, just wanted to shout out Brandon's post. If anyone is interested in the National Coaching Certification Program, the link is in the chat that was put there after Carmen's point. And then Dayton commented, just would love to know, for a question for all panelists, would love to know something, if anything, that each panelist had learned today from each other.
I mean, I can jump in. I don't know if it's necessary. Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a learning, but definitely something that was highlighted, you know, through our conversation, is that definitely we don't necessarily have like systems or policies or processes in place for mental health. You know, always kind of been aware of it, but, you know, definitely something that was raised to the forefront and makes me think a little bit about that. So I think that that's sort of one of the takeaways I have from meeting everyone today.
Maybe you can coordinate with Carmen to like flush that out. I mean, that's community building right there. Anyone else?
One of the big things that jumped, can you hear me, Mars?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool, sorry. One of the big things that jumped out for me, really on the back of what Carmen was talking about earlier, with an experience in the elite performance environment, is that program spaces and play spaces are really just one touch point in a very broad system of interactions that affect outcomes for sport. Again, like program spaces are affected by, how coaches are trained or how parents perceive sport, or what resources might be available to a certain community. So just a stark reminder that what some of the work we do can just be one part of a very big system. So under a constant reminder that understanding that broader system for youth is vitally important.
Anyone else want to share their experience? Kevin, how you doing? How was your experience? And what did you have any takeaways from this conversation?
I just thought I really appreciate like being in a Zoom call with all these like, they have impressive resumes, and like Clement has been working with the like Raptors since 1995, which is really cool. And I just appreciate like being here with, people with amazing resumes.
I appreciate that too. And I'm glad that it's inspiring to you. If you need anything, you hit these people up and they're going to give it to you. You hear me? They're going to give it to you because you, okay. Carmen?
Yeah, I'll just like to add that what I've learned and taken away is the passion that has come from this panel and the group that's interested. I think the passion for breaking barriers and action oriented and ideas to be action oriented is really amazing to see. And I really do hope that the connections continue after this. And yeah, I'll definitely hopefully reach out and see how we can collaborate further.
Yay, I love that. So we have 6 minutes before we have to wrap. We don't have to take it. If there, to my chat moderators, are there any questions in the chat that you want to pose?
Yeah, we got one question in, for another question from Shayna. What steps can everyone take in helping youth feel comfortable and engage in sports when issues surrounding things like Asian hate are showing up more consistently in the community?
I can talk about this quickly. I would say face it head on. If you are in the community, if you're not in the community, when these things are happening, let's address the emotional side of it and address the safety, physical safety side of it. What are some things that as a coach, as a leader, as an administrator, whatever that might look like, is create a sense of safety and belonging. How can we create that belonging back in the space? If it's happening from within, that can be scary, and it needs to be addressed. So I think that a lot of times that because it's hard to talk about and it's hard to address, I have seen this and witnessed this, is coaches, leaders will dance around the problem, especially if they're not in the group. And so addressing it directly and facing it, it can be scary, it can be hard, but it is so important to do.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of layer on top of what Carmen said, and I'm just going to take two stories, that I'm familiar with, because I've been spending a lot of time with Jeremy Lin lately. So I know it's a young group. Jeremy Lin is an Asian American basketball player that played, in the NBA for, I think, the better half of like 10 to 12 years. Recently, he's not in the league anymore, but he played in the G League, which is, obviously the developmental league for the NBA during COVID. And he was actually, name called COVID, during the bubble. And one of the things that he did that I thought was very interesting as an approach to that, because he very easily could have called out the player. He could have publicly called out the player. He publicly called out the situation, but he deliberately pulled the player aside and had a discussion about how harmful that type of rhetoric was for the broader community. And by doing that, that player understood, and he apologized to Jeremy personally, and now they have a great relationship. Versus I couldn't necessarily say that you would have changed his mindset by calling him out in publicly and basically ruining his career. Now, I think there are times that we have to push back and be strong, you know, and fight for our community. But that's where I found that sometimes the use of diplomacy was able to truly change the way someone thought versus necessarily going on the attack. And it's the same thing with, you know, the Raptors 905 situation where, you know, initially it just seemed like there was a resistance to learning at the beginning. But once, you know, I had a chance to say, hey, this is going to be fun. You know, you should enjoy this. This is not about wearing you down. This is going to be enjoyable. You know, you're going to like this. And I think that helped to de-escalate. And I think that the point I'm trying to make is that we do have to sometimes fight, but also at the same time, diplomacy is a very useful tool to try and really incite change. And so that's where I think all of us as young leaders always have to think about in what situation are we doing things and what is most effective. And the key word there is effective versus necessarily what satisfies us.
I appreciate that. If it's okay for me to speak after that, I feel like you just said it. Say, you catch more bees with honey than vinegar. That's what I heard. That's what I heard. And if there I see that there was a response in the chat. Is that a question, Brian?
No, just everyone bigging up Carmen and Clement.
Yeah, you guys are all phenomenal. I really, really appreciate the panelists, the audience. I really appreciate you guys coming through today. We've got 2 minutes left. Tell the people what you have going on. What do you want to prioritize? I have Carmen's information here on screen. Jot it down. Take a picture, print, do a screenshot so that you can have it. And also when I put up the CLS recap, I'll be sure to add in everyone's information that feels comfortable sharing their information. I have, obviously I have Clement and Carmen here. I had a couple of other slides, and as you can see, I had taken them out. So I just want to thank you, everyone, for your time, your thoughts, and your energy. I want you to walk away from this conversation jazzed and full of energy and willing and ready to start implementing some of these ideas if you haven't already, expanding on them if you've already started tackling these issues in your programming and in your leadership. And look out for the CLS recap. And also, if you need any support, you hit me up. This is what I'm here for. This is a community, and we do want to really like support one another and share resources. If you want to promote things, platform opportunities, all those kinds of things, hit me up, jump in my email, and we'll have an amazing time. So go have an amazing day. And panelists, I'll be in touch with you on the back end. To my team, thank you. I love you, appreciate you. And to the audience, y'all stay beautiful. Everybody go have an amazing day.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Mars, did you want us to stay or?
Yeah,
get
you
out?
can stay for a second and then we can just
Yeah.
have a quick chat, make sure everyone's good. You're welcome. Oh, did Carmen and them leave? I'm not Carmen. Did Clement and everybody else leave?
I think Clement, yeah, I think they all left.
Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to share with me before I let you go?
No, I think that was great. I think it was a great conversation, and thanks for moderating. Love the energy in your moderating. Okay, and Law is actually my mom, so I have a feeling that she doesn't know how to log out, so you can probably.
All right, I'll log her out. That's so I got you. Have an amazing day.
Bye, Mom.
Bye, Mom.
Okay,